Humanity had always been a respected member of the Galactic Council. The humans were known for their resourcefulness, their deep sense of unity, and their ability to adapt quickly to any situation. The other species admired their courage and determination. For decades, humanity had worked alongside the different species of the galaxy, helping to keep peace and order. It wasn't perfect, but it was a system that worked. But things were changing. The Galactic Council, which had once been a symbol of peace, was starting to lose its way. More and more, humanity found itself at odds with the decisions made by the Council's leaders. The humans had always been independent thinkers, not afraid to speak their minds and stand up for what they believed in. But now, something darker was happening. The Council had begun to make decisions that seemed to favor the larger, more powerful species at the expense of the smaller ones, and the humans. Captain Alex Lee, the leader of humanity's defense fleet, sat alone in his quarters aboard the starship Vanguard. The soft hum of the engines was the only sound in the room, as he stared at the message that had just arrived. It was from a trusted informant within the Galactic Council. The message was short, but it was clear. The Council had betrayed humanity. Lee couldn't believe it at first. He read the message again, hoping he had misread it. But there it was, in black and white. The Council had secretly formed an alliance with the Torthian Empire, a dangerous and aggressive species. In exchange for weapons and technology, the Torthians would be given access to humanity's resources, including valuable mining colonies and trade routes. Humanity's military and political influence would be undermined, and the human race would be left in the dust. The betrayal cut deep. Humanity had stood by the Council through thick and thin. They had fought alongside their allies, made sacrifices, and helped to maintain peace across the galaxy. And now, the Council had turned its back on them. Lee's mind raced with questions. Why had they done this? Had they never really cared for humanity, or had they simply seen them as a tool to be discarded when they were no longer useful? He sat back in his chair, staring at the screen. The betrayal wasn't just political, it was personal. Lee had spent years building trust with the Council members, working alongside them to ensure the safety of the galaxy. Now, he realized that their loyalty had always been a lie. The human race had been nothing more than a stepping stone for the powerful species in the galaxy. Lee's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. He quickly wiped the anger from his face and stood up. It was Lieutenant Rachel Grant, one of his most trusted officers. She entered the room, her face serious. "Captain, we've received the confirmation," she said. "The Council's deal with the Torthians is real. We've also intercepted a transmission between the Council and the Torthians. It's worse than we thought. They've already begun redirecting some of our fleet's resources to the Torthians. They're planning to strip us of our most valuable assets." Lee clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. How could they do this? How could they turn on us like this? Grant's expression softened. "We don't know yet, Captain. But we need to act fast. If we don't, the Torthians will have control of everything we've worked for. We'll be powerless." Lee nodded, his mind already working through the possible options. "We won't let that happen. We'll fight back. But we need to be careful. The Council may have more allies than we realize. We can't take this lightly." Grant looked him in the eye. "What do you want to do, sir?" Lee took a deep breath, his mind made up. "I'm going to send a message, a final warning to the galaxy. We'll tell them the truth. We'll show them what the Council has done. But we'll also give them one last chance to do the right thing." Grant's eyes narrowed. "And if they don't listen?" Lee's lips curled into a grim smile. "Then we fight. But this time, we fight for something bigger than ourselves. We fight for our future." As Grant left to carry out his orders, Lee stood at the window of his quarters, looking out at the stars. The galaxy seemed so peaceful from here, so distant. But beneath that calm surface, there was a storm brewing. A storm that humanity would not only survive but would rise from stronger than ever. The betrayal had only just begun, and Captain Alex Lee was determined to make sure the galaxy knew that humanity would not be broken. The message would go out soon, and when it did, the galaxy would know that humanity was not to be underestimated. They had been betrayed, but they would not be defeated. Captain Alex Lee knew the stakes were higher than ever. The betrayal by the Galactic Council had shaken humanity to its core. As the commander of the Human Defense Fleet, he had faced many challenges in his career, but nothing like this. The Council's secret alliance with the Torthian Empire was not just a political move. It was an act of war, and humanity was the target. Lee stood in the command center of the Vanguard, his fingers tapping on the console as he stared at the galaxy map in front of him. His crew was busy, preparing the ship for what was coming. The final warning needed to go out to every corner of the galaxy, and Lee knew that once it was sent, there would be no turning back. Lieutenant Rachel Grant walked into the room, her face serious. "Captain, we finished analyzing the Council's transmission. They've already begun their plans to strip humanity of its most valuable resources. It's only a matter of time before they make their move." Lee nodded, a fire burning in his chest. "We can't let them take everything we've worked for. We've fought too hard, and we've lost too much. This ends now." The crew gathered around, listening intently as Lee began to speak. "I'm issuing a final warning. We're going to tell the galaxy the truth. The Galactic Council has betrayed humanity, and now it's time for everyone to know. We'll broadcast it to every planet, every space station, and every fleet we can reach. This is not just a message to the Council, it's a message to the galaxy. If they want to stand with us, they will. If not, they will fall with the Council." The crew nodded in agreement, understanding the gravity of the situation. Captain Lee had always been a leader who inspired loyalty. And now, in the face of betrayal, his words were more powerful than ever. The Vanguard was ready, and the crew was determined to follow their captain into whatever storm awaited them. The transmission was sent out. It didn't matter that they were risking everything. Humanity was not afraid to speak the truth. The message was clear. Flee while you still can. The human race has been betrayed by the Galactic Council. They've made a deal with the Torthian Empire to strip us of our resources and leave us to fend for ourselves. The Council has turned its back on us, but we will not go down without a fight. We will take back what is ours, and we will not be silenced. If you stand with the Council, you will fall with them. If you stand with humanity, then we will fight together." The message echoed across the galaxy, reaching every corner, from the peaceful colonies on the edge of human space to the war-torn sectors controlled by rival factions. Some heard it with disbelief, others with fear. But a few listened with respect, knowing that humanity was not a race to be underestimated. They had seen what humans were capable of, and they knew that the fight for survival would be nothing short of brutal. Back on the Vanguard, Lee watched the reactions flood in. Some planets were already preparing for the worst. Others were doubtful, unwilling to believe that the Council would go this far. But there were a few that were beginning to prepare their defenses. Lee knew that this was only the beginning. "Captain," Lieutenant Grant said, her voice cutting through the silence, "we've received word from several of the smaller factions. They're willing to listen to our cause. Some are even willing to lend us support." Lee looked at her, his face grim. "It's not enough. We need more. The Torthians are powerful, and the Council has many allies. We need to gather every force we can if we want to survive this." The decision was made. The Vanguard would not sit idly by. They would seek out allies, old enemies, neutral races, anyone who still believed in peace and justice. Captain Lee knew the road ahead would be difficult, but humanity had been through far worse and had always emerged stronger. As the crew continued to prepare for their next steps, Lee couldn't help but think about the message they had sent. Flee while you still can. It wasn't just a warning. It was a call to arms, a final chance for the galaxy to choose its side. Humanity would not be defeated. Not now. Not ever. The fight for the future of the galaxy had just begun, and humanity was ready. The message had been sent, and there was no going back. The storm was coming, and it would either break them or make them stronger than ever. After sending the final warning across the galaxy, Captain Alex Lee knew there was no time to waste. The message had been heard, but it was clear that not everyone believed it. Some in the galaxy still doubted humanity's ability to fight back. Some thought it was just a bluff. But Lee and his crew knew better. The Galactic Council's betrayal was real, and now humanity had to prepare for the battle of its life. Inside the Vanguard's command center, the mood was tense. Officers moved quickly between stations, preparing for what was coming next. Lieutenant Rachel Grant was already organizing the fleet's resources, while Officer Caleb Hale was working on a new piece of technology, a weapon that could turn the tide of the war. Humanity had always been known for its ability to adapt and invent, and now was the time to put that to use. "We have to be ready for everything," Captain Lee said, standing at the front of the room. "The Council is powerful, and the Torthians are ruthless. We can't afford to be caught off guard. We need more than just a fleet. We need allies, intelligence, and above all, the element of surprise." Grant nodded, her expression serious. "We've already made contact with some of the smaller factions. A few are willing to help, but we need more. We need to build a coalition strong enough to take on the Council and the Torthians." Lee looked out the window at the stars, thinking. The vastness of space could be both beautiful and terrifying. The galaxy was full of powerful races and dangerous enemies, but it was also full of those who still believed in freedom and justice. It was time to find them. "Caleb, how's the new weapon coming along?" Lee asked. Officer Hale glanced up from his console, a small smile on his face. "It's coming along. It's not ready yet, but we're getting closer. It's a disruptor designed to disable enemy weapon systems and communication without causing permanent damage. If we use it at the right moment, we can hit the Council's forces where it hurts the most." "Good," Lee said. "Keep working on it. We'll need every advantage we can get." As the days passed, the Vanguard traveled through human space, reaching out to potential allies. They made contact with old enemies, species that had once been rivals but now saw the Council's betrayal for what it was, a threat to the entire galaxy. Many of these factions had suffered under the Council's rule, and now they were ready to stand with humanity. Captain Lee's crew worked tirelessly, building relationships, forging new alliances, and gathering intelligence. Slowly but surely, humanity was forming a coalition. It wasn't large yet, but it was growing. The Vanguard also made a few daring raids on Council supply lines, sending a clear message that humanity wasn't going down without a fight. The raids were small, but they were successful, showing that humanity's resolve was stronger than ever. However, the Torthians were not sitting idle. They were powerful and well-organized, and they had already begun making moves to crush humanity's resistance. Their fleet was vast, and they had a terrifying array of weapons at their disposal. The Torthians also had the full support of the Galactic Council, which was now turning against humanity in full force. Lee knew that time was running out. They had to act quickly before the Torthians launched a full-scale attack. Humanity's only chance was to strike first, before the enemy could fully mobilize. One evening, as the crew gathered in the mess hall, Lieutenant Grant approached Lee with some troubling news. "Captain, we've intercepted a communication from the Torthians. They're mobilizing a fleet, and it looks like they're heading straight for one of our key colonies, Terra Nova. If they reach it before we can defend it, we'll lose our foothold in this sector." Lee stood up, his face hardening. Terra Nova was a vital colony, one of the largest in human space. Losing it would be a devastating blow. He looked around the room at his crew, their faces determined. "We don't have much time," he said. "Get the fleet ready. We're going to stop them before they reach Terra Nova." The crew moved quickly, preparing for battle. The Vanguard and its newly formed coalition of allies would face the Torthian fleet head-on. It would be a risky move, but there was no other choice. Captain Lee knew that if they didn't stop the Torthians now, the consequences would be catastrophic. As the Vanguard slipped out of the shadows of a nearby moon, Captain Lee felt the weight of the moment. This was it. The galaxy was watching. Humanity was about to prove that it wouldn't just survive. It would fight back, no matter the odds. The first battle was on the horizon, and Captain Lee and his crew were ready. They had the determination, the allies, and the will to win. All they needed now was the courage to face whatever lay ahead. The moment of truth had arrived. The Vanguard and its small fleet of allies were ready. Captain Alex Lee stood at the command center, his eyes focused on the galaxy map in front of him. The Torthian fleet was approaching Terra Nova, a key human colony, and if they didn't stop them now, the planet would fall. It was time to strike. "Status report," Lee asked, his voice calm but filled with urgency. Lieutenant Rachel Grant, ever steady, looked at the screen. "We're in position, Captain. Our allies are in formation and ready to engage. We've got the element of surprise on our side. The Torthians won't expect us to strike this early." Lee nodded, but he knew the risks. The Torthian fleet was massive, well-equipped, and ruthless. Even with the element of surprise, their strength could overwhelm them if they weren't careful. "Keep the fleet tight. We hit them fast, hit them hard. We'll focus on their weapons systems first. Disrupt their ability to fight back. Then we take the rest down." Grant's eyes narrowed. "Understood. I'll relay the orders." Captain Lee turned to Officer Caleb Hale, who was standing at the weapons station. "Caleb, is the disruptor ready?" Hale gave a confident nod. "It's ready, Captain. We fine-tuned it since the last test. The Torthians won't know what hit them." "Good," Lee replied. "Let's make it count." The Vanguard and its allies moved into position, cloaked in the darkness of space. They waited, watching the Torthian fleet approach Terra Nova's orbit. The Torthians were confident, unaware of the human fleet preparing for the assault. Their ships were large, intimidating, and powerful, but they underestimated humanity's resolve. As the Torthians neared the planet's defenses, Captain Lee gave the order. "Launch the first wave." The battle began in an instant. The Vanguard fired its first round of disruptor pulses, sending shockwaves through the Torthian fleet's communications and weapons systems. Ships froze in place, unable to respond or communicate. The humans moved quickly, capitalizing on the confusion. The human fleet moved with precision. The ships targeted the Torthian vessels' weapons arrays, disabling their ability to fire. The Torthian ships, disoriented and unable to retaliate, were easy targets. The humans moved in for the kill, using their smaller, more agile ships to dart around the larger Torthian warships. Despite their technological advantage, the Torthians were not used to fighting a battle like this. They were powerful, yes, but they were slow and unwieldy in comparison to the humans. The Vanguard and its allies picked them apart, taking out key ships in quick, tactical strikes. Lieutenant Grant coordinated the movements of the fleet with efficiency. "We've disabled their heavy guns, Captain. Their fleet is in disarray. We can finish them off now." "Not yet," Captain Lee replied, his eyes scanning the battlefield. "We need to make sure they can't regroup. Focus on their command ship, take it out, and the rest will fall apart." The human fleet pressed on, now focused on the heart of the Torthian forces. The command ship was a massive vessel, the most heavily armored of them all. It was the brain of the Torthian fleet, and without it, the rest of the ships would be disorganized and lost. "Fire the disruptor pulse on their command ship," Lee ordered. Officer Hale's hands moved quickly over the controls, and with a steadying breath, he launched the pulse. It hit the Torthian command ship with precision. The ship's systems went dark as its shields flickered and failed. The Vanguard and its allies immediately opened fire, targeting the now vulnerable ship. The Torthian command ship shuddered as blast after blast rocked its hull. Within moments, the ship's massive frame cracked and exploded into a fiery burst, sending debris scattering across space. The rest of the Torthian fleet panicked. Without their command ship, the remaining ships were unable to coordinate. The humans moved in for the kill, dismantling the remaining Torthian vessels one by one. The battle was over. The Torthian fleet had been destroyed. Terra Nova had been saved. Captain Lee stood, looking out at the battlefield from the command center, his face stoic. It had been a brutal fight, but humanity had come out victorious. He allowed himself a brief moment of relief before turning to his crew. "We've won the first battle, but this is far from over," he said. "The Torthians will regroup, and the Galactic Council will come after us with everything they've got. We need to stay sharp." Lieutenant Grant walked up to him, her eyes filled with respect. "Captain, we did it. We sent a message. Humanity is not to be underestimated." Lee nodded. "Yes, but this war is far from over. We've only just begun." As the crew celebrated their victory, Lee knew that this was just the beginning of a long, hard fight. The Torthians were powerful, and the Council's betrayal had only deepened humanity's resolve. They would keep fighting, and they would keep winning, until their enemies understood one simple truth: humanity would never back down. The victory over the Torthian fleet at Terra Nova had brought humanity a sense of hope. But Captain Alex Lee knew better than to celebrate too soon. The Torthians were still a dangerous threat, and the Galactic Council was more powerful than ever. This was just the first step in what would be a long, bloody conflict. As the Vanguard and its small fleet of allies limped back to their secret base, Lee reflected on the battle. The Torthians were powerful, but the humans had shown that they could be defeated. The next steps were crucial. They couldn't afford to sit back and wait for the next attack. They needed more allies, more resources, and above all, a plan to take the fight to the Council itself. "We need to think bigger," Lee said as he stood in the briefing room, looking at the map of the galaxy. His crew had gathered around him, listening intently. "The Torthians aren't just going to give up after one defeat. We need to hit them where it hurts. We need to gather more forces, and we need to go on the offensive." Lieutenant Rachel Grant, ever the strategist, nodded. "I agree, Captain, but we need to be careful. If we push too hard, the Council might intervene. We're still outnumbered." Lee glanced at her. "We've always been outnumbered, but we've also always found a way to survive. We need to make sure we strike hard enough that the Torthians and the Council won't know what hit them." Grant paused, then spoke again. "We've been in contact with some of the independent factions, the ones that have stayed neutral for so long. They're willing to help, but they're worried about the Torthians and the Council's retaliation." Lee thought for a moment. What if we could convince them to join us in a full alliance? Not just as neutral parties, but as active participants. If we can get them to fight with us, we'll have the numbers we need to strike back at the Council. It wasn't an easy decision. Convincing neutral factions to join a war was a difficult task, but Lee knew it was their only option. The Torthians and the Council had far more power, and the only way to stand a chance was to unite as many races as possible. With a new plan in mind, Lee and his crew set out to meet with the leaders of the independent factions. The first meeting took place in a quiet system on the outskirts of known space, far away from the Council's reach. It was a place where no one could be easily tracked, and where the fragile peace could be maintained, at least for a while. Captain Lee and Lieutenant Grant met with the representatives of the Free Kolnari, a race of beings known for their incredible strength and loyalty. The Kolnari were skilled warriors, but they had stayed neutral in the Council's politics for centuries. Now, faced with the Council's betrayal of humanity, they were starting to rethink their position. The leader of the Kolnari, a tall, imposing figure named Korlak, spoke first. "You ask us to risk everything for a cause that may fail. The Torthians are not a force to be taken lightly, and the Council has more power than you can imagine." Lee stood firm, his voice steady. "I understand the risk, but think about what the Council is doing. They've abandoned us, and soon they will come after you too. If we don't stop them, they will continue to take more, and eventually, there will be nothing left to protect. We have a chance now to fight back, but we need your help. Together, we can make a difference." Korlak studied Lee for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "And what if you fail? What happens to the culinary then?" "We don't fail," Lee replied, his voice fierce. "We fight to win. And if we succeed, we'll have a galaxy where all races, yours, mine, and everyone else's, can live freely without fear of the Council's control. We can stop them before they destroy us all." Korlak looked around at his fellow culinary leaders, and after a long silence, he nodded. "You have convinced me. The culinary will fight with you, Captain. We may not be many, but we are strong." Lee's heart lifted, but he knew this was only the beginning. The culinary's decision to join the fight was a victory, but they needed more. The other factions, scattered across the galaxy, would need convincing as well. As the meeting ended, Lieutenant Grant approached Lee with a concerned expression. "That went better than expected, Captain, but we still need to contact the other factions. If we can get the Zeren Alliance or the Xantha, we'll have a real chance." Lee nodded, his mind already working. "We will. We'll take it one step at a time, and we'll bring them in. The galaxy is starting to notice humanity's resolve. The Council and the Torthians won't know what hit them." The fight for the galaxy was far from over, but now, humanity had a new hope. An alliance of independent factions, ready to rise against the betrayal of the Council. And Captain Alex Lee was determined to see it through to the end. The Vanguard moved through the stars, its engines humming steadily as it made its way toward the next meeting point. The culinary had agreed to join the cause, but Captain Alex Lee knew that this was only the first step. The other factions were still hesitant, unsure of the risks involved in taking on the Torthians and the Galactic Council. He had to convince them that they could win. As the Vanguard approached the system where they were scheduled to meet with the Zeren Alliance, Lee stood on the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back. The Zeren were known for their intelligence and cunning, but they were also a proud race. They valued strategy over brute strength, and convincing them to join the fight would require more than just a show of force. Lieutenant Rachel Grant stood beside him, her expression focused. "Captain, the Zeren fleet has been spotted in the outer system. They're not far from our position." Lee nodded, glancing at the nearby starfield. "Good. Prepare to make contact. Let's see if we can convince them to join us." Minutes later, the communication link was established. A Zeren warship appeared on the screen, its sleek form glowing in the darkness of space. The Zeren leader, Commander Ishura, appeared on the screen, her green eyes sharp and calculating. "Captain Lee," she said, her voice cool, "we've received your message, and we understand your position. But we are not so easily swayed. The Zeren value intelligence, not brute strength. You must prove that your cause is worth our resources and our trust." Lee stepped forward, meeting her gaze with confidence. "I understand, Commander. The Torthians and the Galactic Council think they can control the galaxy, but they're wrong. They've already betrayed us, and now they'll stop at nothing to crush anyone who stands in their way. If we don't unite, if we don't stop them, the galaxy will be lost." Ishura studied him for a moment, her eyes unreadable. "And what would you have us do, Captain? Risk our fleets and our people on a gamble? Your victory at Terra Nova was impressive, but it was only one battle. You will need more than courage to win this war." Lee nodded. "I agree. But I have something the Torthians and the Council don't: unity. The culinary, the independent factions, and soon the Zeren. Together, we'll create a force they can't ignore. We won't just fight. We'll outthink them, outmaneuver them, and make them regret ever turning their backs on humanity." The silence on the other end of the communication felt heavy, but Lee didn't back down. He knew that now wasn't the time to waver. If the Zeren could see the possibility of victory, they would join them. If not, they risked being left behind in the coming storm. Finally, Ishura spoke. "You speak with conviction, Captain, Perhaps that is what the galaxy needs. Very well. The Ziran will lend their support to your cause, but we will not fight blindly. We will need detailed plans, intelligence, and a guarantee that our fleets will be used wisely. Lee smiled. You have my word, Commander. We will fight smart, and we will fight together. With the Ziran on their side, Lee's crew now had a new sense of momentum. The Vanguard continued its journey, reaching out to other factions, smaller ones, many of which had been too afraid to join the conflict. Slowly but surely, the coalition grew stronger. The next major meeting took place on a remote station, where the Xantha, a race of highly adaptable beings, awaited them. The Xantha had long remained neutral in galactic politics, preferring to stay out of conflicts. But with the threat of the Torthians and the Council looming, even they could no longer afford to sit on the sidelines. The leader of the Xantha, High Counselor Varric, was a being of shifting, mutable form. His features were never fixed, always changing, as if he could adapt to any situation. His voice, however, was steady and clear. Captain Lee, he began, we have heard much of your efforts to unite the galaxy, but we do not fight for ideals or promises. We fight for survival. If you can prove that this war will be one we can win, we will lend our support. Lee took a deep breath. This was it, the final step in forming the coalition he needed. We've already won one battle. We've gained the trust of the Kolnari and the Ziran. But this isn't just about one victory. It's about the future of the galaxy. If we don't stop the Torthians and the Council now, they will continue to oppress and destroy everything in their path. This is our chance to break the chains of control they've placed on us. If we don't fight, we will lose everything. Varric seemed to consider this for a long moment before nodding. Your words are persuasive, Captain. We will stand with you, for now. But remember, we will not follow blindly. We will hold you accountable for every decision. Lee's heart lifted. I wouldn't have it any other way, Counselor. Together, we can win this war. As the Xantha joined the cause, the coalition was nearly complete. The galaxy's independent factions, once scattered and divided, were beginning to unite against a common enemy. But even with these new allies, Lee knew that the hardest battles lay ahead. The Council and the Torthians were already preparing their next move. The storm was gathering, and soon it would break. The time for planning was over. The coalition was united, and every race, human, Kolnari, Ziran, and Xantha, was ready to strike. Captain Alex Lee stood at the front of the command center on the Vanguard, watching as his crew prepared for the final push. The Galactic Council and the Torthians had underestimated humanity, but now they were about to feel the full force of the united galaxy. We've gathered everything we need, Lieutenant Rachel Grant said, her voice steady, but there was a hint of excitement in her eyes. All the factions are in position. We can launch the attack whenever you're ready, Captain. Lee nodded, his face serious. This is it. We take the fight to them now. No more waiting, no more hiding. We finish this, once and for all. The Vanguard and its fleet of allies were ready. They had taken down Torthian ships before, but now they were going to face the full might of the Torthian war machine, backed by the vast resources of the Galactic Council. Lee knew the odds were still against them, but he also knew that they were fighting for something greater than just survival. They were fighting for freedom, for the future of the galaxy. Get us into position, Lee ordered. We strike when the Council fleet leaves their staging area. We hit them before they have time to react. The crew worked quickly, moving the Vanguard into the heart of enemy space. The fleet was silent, only the hum of the engines breaking the quiet. Tensions were high, but there was also a sense of unity that had never been felt before. The various factions were no longer just allies. They were a single force, united by a common cause. As they moved closer to the enemy, the battle plan unfolded in Lee's mind. First, they would target the Council's supply lines, cutting off any reinforcements. Then, they would go after the Torthian flagship. If they could cripple the Torthian command structure, The rest of the fleet would fall into chaos. "Lieutenant Grant," Lee said, his voice calm but commanding, "prepare the disruptor pulses. Once we hit their supply lines, we need to move fast. We can't give them a chance to regroup." Grant gave a quick nod. "Disruptor pulses are ready, Captain. We've got a window of about 15 minutes before they realize we're here." Lee checked the time. 15 minutes wasn't long, but it was all they needed. As the Vanguard and its fleet moved into position, Lee's thoughts raced. This was the moment when everything would change. If they won, the galaxy would have a chance at peace. If they lost, the Council would crush them, and everything would be lost. 5 minutes to target," Grant said, pulling Lee from his thoughts. "All systems are green. We're ready." Lee stood tall, looking at his crew. They were all nervous, but they were also determined. They had come this far, and they weren't about to stop now. Humanity had already defied the odds, and now they would prove they could do it again. "All right, everyone," Lee said, his voice steady. "This is it. Let's show them what humanity can do." The Vanguard and the Coalition fleet erupted into action. The first wave of disruptor pulses slammed into the enemy supply lines, knocking out their communications and cutting off their reinforcements. The Torthians and the Council ships were thrown into confusion as their systems went offline. "Now," Lee shouted, "target the flagship." The human fleet swarmed toward the massive Torthian flagship. The Torthian ships, unable to respond due to the disruption, were sitting ducks. The smaller, faster ships of the human fleet darted around them, picking them off one by one. The flagship's massive guns fired, but it was too late. The Vanguard and its allies had already taken out the flagship's main weapon systems, leaving it defenseless. "Prepare for final assault," Grant called, her voice tight with focus. "The flagship is going down." Captain Lee watched as the battle unfolded before him. The combined strength of the Coalition had turned the tide. The Torthian fleet was breaking apart, and the Council ships were in disarray. But there was no time to relax. They had to keep pressing, keep pushing until the Torthians and the Council were defeated for good. With one final blast, the Torthian flagship exploded, sending shockwaves through the remaining fleet. Without their command ship, the Torthians were lost. The Council ships, now without leadership, began to scatter and retreat. The galaxy's most powerful forces were falling apart. "We did it," Grant said, her voice filled with disbelief. "We actually did it." Lee let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The battle was won. The Torthians and the Galactic Council had been defeated. The galaxy was finally free. "Not yet," Lee replied, his voice calm. "We've won the battle, but the war isn't over. We've still got to make sure the Council knows we'll never back down. But this is the beginning of something new, something better." The crew cheered, but Lee's mind was already turning to the future. They had won today, but the fight for the galaxy's future would continue. And as long as they had each other, humanity and their allies would never stop fighting. The galaxy was finally free. But the journey had only just begun.